I say, still here, just dancing. So, hello everyone, welcome to another session with us on Aucademy. I am Dr. Chloe Farahar. I am a shaved-headed white person with giant glasses and one of the giant hoods from this company that's literally just called Huge Hoods, and they're just absolutely ginormous and soft and comfy, and it's kind of like a green and has a spelling mistake because I made the mistake of not double, triple, quadruple checking the spelling. So it's supposed to say autistic sapien self-wise, but I misspelled autistic, surprisingly. And I'm very excited. We're joined today by Chris Bonello. If you wouldn't mind doing a physical description for us.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm a white guy in his mid-30s with short blonde hair and a short blonde beard. And I'm wearing a shirt that has underdogs, which is the Tartar novel series. Funnily enough, this one also has a... Well, strictly speaking, it's not a spelling mistake, it's a grammar mistake, because they ended up putting a colon at the end of underdogs, and that's... as a writer, I can't unsee that.
You can't, can you? Because as soon as I'd been wearing this, and I'd even washed it before I proper looked at it again. And then I realised it's got a spelling mistake in autistic. And I was like, no.
Oh, yeah. Even if the rest of the world doesn't see it, you will never see anything else. It's like when a band is playing, the audience only hears the notes that go right, but the band only hears the stuff that goes wrong.
Yep. It's really frustrating, but it's fine. Do you know why? Because it just means I buy more hoodies from this company. I've already got 3 and I love them. They're just absolutely huge. And they come down, you can get ones down to your ankles, which is just silly, but I haven't got that quite as big as that. Anyway, thank you everyone for being here. And today we are basically talking about Chris's most recent findings, which you've literally just published in the last week? 2 weeks?
Two-ish. Yeah, it's I tried to get it out before World Autism Acceptance Month because I felt, well, it needed to be there in time for us to actually present some data, because there's so much information, and I've used information in inverted commas, that goes out around Autism Acceptance Month. Some of it's trustworthy, some of it isn't, some of it's anecdotal, some of it's not. So I think that the best defense against misinformation is data. So I thought I felt some kind of responsibility to get it out before April. And it just managed in time. So yeah, it is like the last week or 2.
Lovely. And that's such a potentially autistic nerdy thing, which is combat with data. Let's combat this with data. So the title for today is Important Autistic Topics According to the Autistic Not Weird survey, with 11,212 people, which as a researcher is just a mind-boggling, and I'm very envious of those numbers. It's an amazing sample size, and it's over 7,000 who are autistic themselves, or at least acknowledging or aware that they're autistic.
Yeah, 7,491 that clicked yes regardless of diagnosis. There were a couple more thousand that said I might be, but for I don't know, data purity, for lack of a better phrase, I analysed largely in isolation the 7,491 confirmed autistic people. And yeah, what I really liked about what I was able to do with the data was I was able to filter out those who were autistic, those who were non-autistic professionals, those who were parents or caregivers of autistic people living in South America, those who wanted a cure but had negative opinions of VBA, and Australians who are non-religious and also non-binary. There's basically so much that I could use the filters on it. I could analyze.
Any particular reason that you're not a researcher? Because it sounds very...
No, I have a mathematics degree, but I graduated in 2007 and then went into primary school teaching multiplication tables to 9-year-olds. But you never lose that really, really nerdy side, and that's yeah, I'm a massive nerd, just in case anyone hasn't already gathered.
Beautiful.
But yeah, but people have occasionally mentioned, have you thought about turning this into a PhD paper? And well, I'm now that I'm just about to leave teaching, I'm thinking that maybe that is something to do in the future, something that I might actually pursue.
Well, what you've been able to accomplish without, research funding, and I'm assuming without any research body supporting you in any capacity. I know you had somebody support you who is a researcher, just have a look over, wasn't that right? But that's not the same as potentially having a research body
someone who quite a high profile researcher who wanted to stay anonymous because they didn't want to be interpreted as giving ethics approval. And there's other academics and friends, or in some cases both, gave me a hand with it. And it received no direct funding, although, while on the topic, I need to say how grateful I am to the people who have read the stuff on there about my Patreon and the Ko-fi account and so on, and actually did support me, because that means quite a lot. Not so much the fact that finances, but also the fact that people value the survey. Like,
absolutely, yeah,
really
because
do.
yeah, absolutely. So haven't even started the proper intro bit yet, because I've got into things already. It's fine. We can always go back to things, because now I started. It's only a relatively short blog, but trying to put together any links or resources around things like, largely it's about the preference, but also the psychological well-being properties of being an autistic person, not a person with autism. And the reason I put that blog together angrily because I was asked by some really lovely people who they'd been asked by others, well, where's the evidence that autistic people prefer identity first? And that annoyed me, because they don't ask for that evidence when it comes to person first language.
Good points.
And I got really...
It's just the way we've always done it.
Yeah. And I was like, well, where did you ask the evidence when you were taught that in whatever degree you did 20 years ago? And, this kind of thing.
Using textbooks from another 20 years ago.
Exactly. So I just angrily put this blog together and then, and that is, it links to your 2018 survey and, screenshots of the table the graph, to demonstrate that preference as well. But we can get into the nitty gritty of this as well in a minute. But yeah, I put that together. So it's very valuable. But we'll also talk about that as well, because some people who will be, there's always those people who want to nitpick. And they're, I saw a comment on, like, as a researcher myself, I value your work. It is very important, beautiful work with a ridiculously enviable number of participants. As a social psychologist, or I think I'm leaning towards community psychologist after talking to Monique Botha about the differences, because of what I'm actually interested in is that sort of grassroots change for people around, like, prejudice towards autistic people. In social psychology, we are very happy if we get like 200 participants. It's really hard. So those people who, there was that one comment I saw on your survey, I restrained myself from angrily replying to them and just, saying, do you realize how hard it is? And those numbers are great, and etc. etc. What was my point, Chloe? I did have one. This is what happens.
That happens to me so much.
I've just got into like this rant with this person that was basically, they were just saying, well, they're people who use social media and things like this. And it's like, I don't think people actually understand how we go about as researchers getting participants. They're either university
I know which
students,
comment you're about, yes.
Yeah, they're either university students, or it's kind of that snowball effect using social media. Like, it's really, unless it's a particular population, like a clinical population, when you're actually going to like mental health services, the way that you've collected this data is not that different, other than it's on a bigger scale. Yeah. It's fantastic. Anyway, sorry, you were going to say.
Yeah, it's when you're trying to find participants, you go where people are. Well, specifically, you go with people with an interest in the area that you're researching, and that involved. To be fair, there was a couple of comments about how the original version of the article didn't actually talk about where I got the pool of participants from, which was actually a good point. So I did edit in that. Yes, these are the places that I went to, and one of the early charts was, well, there was a question there: did you find this survey through Autistic Not Weird? And it might sound like me kind of subtly promoting my page. Well, I don't really do subtle. At least I don't intentionally do subtle. The reason I asked that question was so that it was preempting the question of bias. Like, oh, well, these are just your own followers who are saying this. Therefore, I don't have to change my opinion. When actually only 40%, which is a surprisingly small number, not going to lie, very surprisingly small number, only 40% found it autistic not weird. So 60% did not.
Found it elsewhere.
Rather hilariously, in 2018, 49.8% did and 49.8% didn't, because 0.4% of people skipped the question, which meant both yes and no were both in the minority, which was hilarious.
Very random. Don't worry about the comments at the moment. There's just some fun around because we're talking around autistic. Like you said, it was important for you to get this out for Autistic Acceptance Month.
Yes.
Or what I'd like to just call Autistic Month. Let's just have Autistic Month and we just take over for a whole month.
Maybe Autistic Pride Month.
Well, we've got Autistic Pride.
We have, yes.
Specifically for us, whereas the month of April is really not for us. So that's why there's some of these fun comments.
Do you think that it's kind of shifting in our favour? That historically it has not been for us, but well, you can basically split autistic advocates into two groups: those who avoid the internet like the plague during April, and those who double down and really make an effort during April. So I think, despite the negative history, there is a chance of us just taking it back, so to speak.
We did talk about that a bit last year, actually. So I think it was David Graham and Tigger Pritchard and myself. We talked about that, how there felt like there's been in the last couple of years a bit of a shift. I think that will largely be in certain countries, particularly like the UK, as much as prejudice towards us still has a long way to go in terms of reducing it. I think the prejudice towards us is very different compared to other countries, particularly things like the States, where ABA is so prevalent compared to the UK, although we do still have ABA in this country. Which and we're not going to probably go into lots of details about the specifics. So just to flag that we might be discussing, based on actually some of the interesting things that Chris has found, things about anti-vax, I guess, or vaccination myths, what kinds of things people hold as views based on your surveys, mentioning about ABA, and actually, which I've made a note about because I found that really interesting and important as well, which was the way that you were questioning or asking based on age, if an autistic person had gone through ABA, whether they would support it for use with other autistic people. And so that we're going to talk about that because it's really interesting too. And around cure rhetoric, so around whether people in your survey were pro or anti-autism cure. So just to flag that for people, but it's not like we're going to be talking about the ins and the outs, if you like, of those topics, if that makes sense. Let's go back to the start, because I'm already getting too interested in the topic and getting delving right in. Let's go to the start, because we've not had you on before, which is just so exciting to have you on. Not that we hadn't had you on before. So obviously we know you're Chris, but who are you and what is or are your dedicated interests? Okay.
Well, I think the second one's kind of already answered without much detail from me. And also, I'm a novelist as well. Sorry?
I can never say it. It's a Rubik's Cube.
Rubik's Cube, yeah.
That's the one.
Spelled with K''S, not X, because it was prevented by Dr. Rubik Erno, who was a mathematician, and would not surprise me if he was autistic himself. I mean, he was a topologist, so it wouldn't surprise me. Anyway, so yeah, who am I? Actually, I used to be a primary school teacher, and then I left when I realised how much mainstream education sucks. And then since then, I've been a teacher in a school specifically for autistic students, and that's gone really well, but it is time to leave now. So I'm leaving that school in a few months because Autistic Not Weird took off rather well. I've got enough clients and speaking engagements and far too few hours for my current lifestyle to be sustainable. So yeah, it's a amicable goodbye to the well, I was about to say to a teacher profession, to special/special education, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, so I'm soon to be a former specialist education teacher, but well, once a teacher, always a teacher. And these days I'm an autism advocate and surprisingly novelist as well.
Well, and show that for us. So for those who can't see it, this is Underdogs. Is that the first of 3?
Yep, and obviously I planned ahead and at least have these next to me just in case someone, usually me, mentions it. But yeah, those are the first 3 out of 4 Underdogs books, and they're basically neurodivergent dystopia, as in the whole of Britain's been imprisoned in these giant walled cities, and they're under the watchful eye of a million-ish clone soldiers, and only 13 people remain free in the abandoned British countryside to try and free them. So yeah, 13 against a million. Guess who wins? So I basically originally it was a coping strategy for unemployment. Me writing this story, this one part of the universe where I got to actually have some control over what happened. I won't go into those details because it was just a fairly miserable time, and that story helped. Even if it never got published, it would still have helped me. But anyway, those 13 people, 8 of them are teenagers who escaped an attack on their special school. So we've got autistic heroes and dyslexic heroes in fields of Down syndrome, anxiety, ADHD, and so as wide a range as I could realistically put into the novel. And they're the ones trying to free the people who kind of put them at the bottom of the social food chain. In fact, borrowing the words from the blurb, after a lifetime of being defined by their weaknesses, the teenagers must learn how to play to their strengths and become the best they can be in a world that has never been on their side.
Fantastic. And because, we all know there's not enough decent representation of neurodivergent people in most forms of media.
Yeah.
And actually, typically, when it's not written, at least by a knowingly neurodivergent person, the best representations are when they're not making it about neurodivergence. They just happen to have a very neurodivergent or multiple neurodivergent characters. They tend to be when they're not written by.
It was important to, there's both representation-related reasons and narrative-based reasons why it was such a difficult thing to do. Because as an author, you do want to introduce your reader to certain concepts. You want to know which ones are autistic, which ones are dyslexic, and so on. But at the same time, you don't want to run the risk of having, oh yeah, Raj was running around being dyslexic all over the place.
I don't know, I kind of like that now. I know that that's not how you've necessarily written the books, but I actually quite like that, being dyslexic all over the place. Yeah. Being autistic, just flapping in everyone's faces, which I think we should do anyway, just for the month of April.
Oh, yeah, that reminds me of it was a meme that I made, but it was based off something that I said during speaking engagements, but when they say, we need to make autistic children indistinguishable from their peers, like, oh, well, how do you do that? Make the non-autistic kids flap as well. I mean, seriously, try it. It's amazing.
Yeah, and that's a lot of what we do with Aucademy work, I'm sure with the work that you're doing as well, which is that it's, why can't the neurotypical people be more like us?
I mean, on the one hand, I'm not going to be completely naive and say, everyone in the world must adapt to meet me. That there does need to be. I'll use the phrase "meeting us halfway." I don't literally mean halfway, because some autistic people like me, I can adapt pretty well to other people's comfort zones once I actually know what those comfort zones are. But then there are people who I've known personally and professionally who just wouldn't be able to, well, A, do it at all, but B, safely and safely do it without actually damaging themselves in the process. So when I say we need to meet the world halfway, but we need the world to meet us halfway, it's not necessarily halfway, but both sides do need to adapt. And a lot of it is just down to respecting other people's differences at the same time as, how do I phrase this? You know, when people say, I'm not going to treat you as any different, I saw the expression on your face. Even I could read that expression on your faces. It's like when people talk about race and say, oh, I don't see colour. And it's well-meaning, but it also...
It means they're ignoring oppression, they're ignoring prejudice, and it's not actually helpful. I want people to recognize that the world disables me. I want people to know that I am different in that respect, because otherwise people won't make the effort to make adaptations or change. Maybe can we have it more like we go 30, they go 70?
Depending on the person. I mean, and also on specific days as well. Some days I can go 90% to like when I was a primary school teacher, I would adapt to the non-autistic majority of children in my class, and I could do it reasonably well. But other days I just can't. I need someone to accommodate me. It depends on the person, depends on their anxieties, depends on their capabilities, it depends on how many spoons they have that particular day. But yeah, we do need to make an effort to adapt to each other. And when I say autistic people should at least do some of the adapting, there are some caveats to that. And autistic people should do what they can to adapt, but not in any way that comes at a cost to themselves, because that's where it goes too far. And also, yeah, let's remember, of course, that we are already accommodating the rest of the world just by living in the rest of the world. Point made, I can't remember whether it's a meme or an article or speech, but there's a point that they made recently where it's only called accommodation if you do it to an autistic person or a disabled person, neurodivergent person, whatever. When we adapt things to make the general population comfortable, it's called normality. If you do the same thing for an autistic person, it's inclusion, it's accommodations, it's being virtuous, it's being kind, rather than just the fact that it should be the way that you just treat people.
And there's a huge issue around this idea of inclusion anyway, because a lot of the time it's not actually inclusion, it's attempts for assimilation, which is not the same. Inclusion at somebody's wavelength, on their level, on how they experience the world, we're far from that in a lot of countries, including the UK. It is much more about assimilation in a lot of places. How much can we make this person, like you say, indistinguishable from their peers? And it's kind of like that's not a goal that we want. Fantastic. So we've got the Rubik's Cube. Got your novels.
Oh yeah, this was like the introduction to me, wasn't it? That we've ended up going. Yeah. What is it with us and tangents? There's too much about the world that's just interesting.
Yeah, this is why the sessions are never an hour. You know, we always end up going longer because it's just far too interesting. Okay, so the novels, Rubik's Cubes, you're going to be basically moving into and away from teaching in the traditional sense, I guess, because you're still going to be teaching. You're educating, aren't you? That's your
your training. That's what I am.
Yeah.
I think I will always be and want to be an educator, but being a teacher is something quite different. It's one thing that's helped me leave mainstream teaching. At the time, I thought I was leaving teaching forever. One thing that really helped me to make that decision was I grew up in a youth group called the Boys Brigade. We're basically the people who invented the Scouts and taught the Scouts how to go camping. But yeah, we're a Christian youth group connected to our local church. And my captain, when I was growing up, he was an absolute legend of a guy who, like, everywhere he stepped in the world, he improved it. Every person he interacted with, he built those people, and it was wonderful. But he was a chemical engineer for 40 years, and that was just his job. It was just what he did to feed him, his wife, and his children, and all the life-changing stuff he did was kind of done in his free time. So that gave me quite some perspective. That I'm not going to say. I was about to say I feel like a bit of a hypocrite for this, but no, I don't. So I'm just aware that I'm one of those people who's actually moving into a career where I actually am doing what I really, really want to do. But it did give me some perspective about. Then everyone needs to do something that they, as a person, value, whether it's part of your profession or whether it's something you do in your free time. Well, that's down to the person. But yeah, congruence, as therapists put it.
What was that? Sorry, and
congruence. That's the therapy phrase for it. How well what you do as a person matches who you are as a person. And mainstream primary school teaching, I wanted to. Well, I was my real self when I was a primary school teacher, and maybe that's why I struggled a bit. I was fine as a student in mainstream education. It was when I was an adult in mainstream education that it suddenly got very challenging. But then I went into special education, and this school that I'm just about to leave, a school specifically for autistic students. It was the 10th anniversary of, I can't remember whether it's my autism diagnosis or the 10th anniversary of me finding out I was autistic, but I brought in loads of Haribos and was giving them to the students on the way out to celebrate my 10th autisversary. And there's no way I could have done that in mainstream. But it's a school where we've always been, again, builders of people. Yes, we're putting knowledge and academic facts in people's heads, but that's not really what the school's about. I mean, yeah, I'll help year 11s get their qualification, but, well, 20 years from now, how much of their GCSEs or functional skills qualifications going to matter compared to the self-perception that they were given permission to grow up with?
Yeah, and we discussed that in different settings, actually, about the big difference between education and learning. There's a big difference between education and just the intrinsic. Every human being wants or does learn. It just depends what it is, what it's about, and how they do it. Whereas education is a very particular thing. I want to come back to your point, which is basically what you're talking about, that I find is quite useful for consulting with autistic people, particularly. Like I consult with anyone else. It's just autistic people. That's all I do. It's fantastic because I have found meaning in my life. And I remember a few years back, there was a study. It was a big scale study by, I think, University of Liverpool. And they wanted to find out on a large scale across the UK what happiness meant to people. And what they kind of found before they really delved into the data in any depth, because I was talking to the main researcher, was that it was about meaning. So happiness is very fleeting. We can't sustain that. But if you've got something that you, like you say, either you can use different terminology, but value, that you find meaning in, even if that thing is quite hard or exhausting or whatever, that's what makes you happy. Because like I say, happiness can be quite fleeting.
Yeah, very good points. So it kind of links to what I was saying not long ago about Ted, Mike Acton, what gave his life meaning, what gives my life meaning, whether it's Christianity or whether it's autism advocacy or whether it's educating or building up the young people that I have in my life professionally or like children and friends and so on. These things which in the long run are so much better for people's mental health, because we all have things should all have things to remedy short-term anxiety, short-term depression with a lowercase d. The things that I'm having a really miserable day, I'm just going to play video games until 4 a.m, like I did last night, because I bloody well deserved it. 4 a.m, didn't go today until midday because I've been working so hard for so long. I needed that. But that one night of gaming wasn't going to resolve all of my issues. That's something that you need, something really long term. Exactly like you said, we need the things that deliver meaning to our lives. Whether you find that through faith or whether you find it through your occupation, whether you find it through the stuff that you do in your wider life in general. Yeah, I think we need to draw an important distinction between the stuff that helps us in the short term, like speed solving. These is a massive distraction, and it's great for distracting myself from the difficult things, and the things that really help us in terms of our identity and what we feel we're doing here.
And I guess I also bring that up as well because it's on this. I'm sticking with this idea of education, and that, you know, whether we feel safe or comfortable in education, whether adult or child. And there's always that push for this thing of people living up to their potential. But they don't mean living up to the potential of the individual. They mean living up to my or societal expectations. They don't mean, what is your personal potential? My personal potential might be, I don't know, trying to think of something just really random and bog standard that's not. Do you see what I mean? Like pushing for people to live up to actually other people's expectations. Trying to think of something. I don't know. Being able to do the Rubik's Cube, right? That's you might be able to do that professionally to some extent. I know that there will be like professional competitions and things for doing the Rubik's Cube, but that might be your personal potential as opposed to, I don't know, an individual getting degrees or getting married or, you know, those kinds of things. And the reason I bring this up is I want to come back to this idea of meaning. This is really not what we were going to talk about. This is fantastic.
No, it's not. So do people mind this? I mean, did people are people feeling? Wait, I came here to hear nerdy things about.
This is a neurodivergent only.
Is everyone okay with this?
No, this is a neurodivergent only platform, but we will have mixed neurologies in the comment section. So I'm sure people are used to the fact that it depends on who we've got, what way we go in terms of the tangents and things. But it's still important and relevant because we're going to come back to some of the really key things in your survey about people's well-being and things like that. Yeah. Because I had this fantastic young person and they were just they weren't happy. And, you know, people around them were like, oh, but they've got such great potential. We just need to, and it's like, but that doesn't mean anything to the individual. That person needs personal, important meaning to get them up in the morning. And whatever that might be. What's this? Is this Sigh? I want to reach my potential of giving Boris Johnson a wedgie while cramming SBC into his front. Thank you for that, Sigh.
It's all about what potential means to you, isn't it? And so that's what. Okay, that specific sentence isn't what we focus on in special education, but we do, generally speaking, have this attitude of potential means different things to different people. And yeah, an example that I might think of, I have known a great number of young people, autistic or otherwise, who aren't traditionally academic, but and a lot of them will say, I want to be a mechanic when I'm older. And I have great respect for anyone who wants to go into any kind of engineering of any kind, because we talk about the advancement of IT and how all jobs are going to be in computers, but you're always going to need people to maintain the hardware, including cars, for example. So, yeah, and I'm reminded of this thing that I occasionally say to young people who know they're not academic and in their time with us have been kind of encouraged to, well, we're helping them undo the damage done to them by those who have basically led them to believe that you're not academic, therefore you're stupid. When really it's so much more. I tell them that I am only considered really clever because I was born in halfway through the 1980s. If I'd been born 10,000 years ago, I'd have had learning difficulties because I cannot start a fire. I cannot hunt my own food. I cannot build my own shelter. I am very fortunate to have been born in a time where we focus on math skills, and I have a mathematics degree, English skills, and I've published novels and things like that. So, the other thing I tell them is I remind them of this meme that I saw online. Yeah, whenever you tell a teenager, reminds you of this meme I saw, you have their attention. I don't tell them something on Facebook because no one under 30 uses Facebook apparently. But,
that's really sad.
Anyway, so I saw this meme some online about it was a picture of a mechanic who said, "I'm tired of people talking about some uneducated people who didn't go to college and what their political opinions are and all that. But yeah, call me uneducated as much as you want, but next time your car breaks down, you can bloody fix it."
Yeah,
I can't fix a car. I can run a survey with over 11,000 people. I've got 3 university degrees, and my record in solving these is 13.77 seconds. But don't ask me to fix my car. I can't do it. My students can.
And this is the thing of, we just, particularly in a lot of our Western cultures and countries, we don't respect, and I feel like maybe a lot of us autistic people do, but we don't respect people's niches, the things that people are good at and what their potential is for them, their skills. And we're not respecting in certain societies of that, because absolutely, yeah, somebody who can make furniture, that's amazing.
I'm sat on furniture right now. Don't tell me that's not a useful skill.
And putting things together via IKEA.
Really short.
Putting things together like IKEA stuff does not count, right? You know, somebody
designing IKEA stuff counts.
Okay, right. When did you discover you were autistic?
This is still the intro, isn't it?
I know.
Oh, wow. Okay, right. I discovered. Sorry, I forgot to turn the light on. But yeah, short version.
I don't know the specifics, but where in the country are you? Because it's obviously nice.
East Midlands.
You're out in the world.
Yeah, I've got a very kind of generic British accent, but I'm from the Midlands.
Fab.
Yeah, I found out I was autistic on 29th of November 2009 after my sister pointed it out to me, because my experience of autism was autism with like complex learning disabilities and so on. And her experience of autism, she was a mainstream teacher as well, got there before me because she's older. So she had seen young children who very much reminded her of the younger brother who she grew up with, except they had a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome. So that's what she then told me when I was going through a pretty rough time. Chris, what I feel might help you to know that you're autistic. And yeah, a year and a bit later, got a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome, as it was called back then, 11th of January 2011. I remember the date because it was so satisfying to write the date. It's like 11-1-1-11. And it's, yeah, beside the point. But yeah, I was 24 when I found out and 25 when I got the diagnosis. And I'm just going to switch the lights on.
Sure.
You can talk because I can still hear you, obviously.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so you were around 24.
24 when I found out. 25 when I got the diagnosis.
When you got the diagnosis. Can I ask how old you are now?
36.
36, okay.
Yeah. I should also probably point out that I was being assessed for autism from an early age. I was assessed for autism when I was 4 years and 3 months old, but it was 1989 and the movie Rain Man had only been out for a year. So the general, well, the report that was written about it was basically a damning report into my development delay, but no, not autistic because he can talk. He can use the toilet by himself. And he knows what numbers are. Every time you walk into talk to my mum, every time we walk into nursery, he stops at every lamppost because he has to read out the numbers off the lamppost. So he can't possibly be autistic. He knows what numbers are. And I'm very glad that mum did actually let me stop and read out those numbers because I've got a mathematics degree now. But I could introduce this to a wider point about how even though the professionals had written this kind of damning report, I was thankfully surrounded by, well, teachers, by and large, some of them were crap, but teachers who defined me by my strengths rather than by my weaknesses, parents who saw me for who I was rather than for who I wasn't. And when I make this point in front of wider audiences, I usually finish it by saying, well, they could have spent my early childhood years mourning over my deficiencies and then being surprised when I didn't reach my potential for some reason. So yeah, when I talk about the damning report that was written about me at the age of 4, like expressive language skills of a 2-year-old and all these other things, I say that the moral of the story isn't, oh, well done, Chris, you've done so well, because I was a 4-year-old boy. Back then, it was the grown-ups around me who decided what my future was going to look like. I can't remember what we were originally talking about. Oh, yeah, that's it. When did I find out I was autistic? I was assessed for autism in 1989. The answer was no, don't be stupid. And assessed, again, not for autism, but just to see why I was so academically ahead of my peers whilst being so far socially behind them in 1995 when I was 10. And they talked about all the traits of what would later be known as Asperger's syndrome, all the traits that we're quite familiar with today. And they concluded it as wasn't autism, wasn't even Asperger's syndrome. They wrote it down as Christopher has a slightly odd personality. Because you could do that in 1995.
Yeah, like that.
So I always take the positives from that and I say, maybe it's just me because I've spent most of my life hanging around teachers, but have you ever noticed that most adults never claim to be normal? They all say, oh, well, I'm a little bit weird, I'm slightly odd, but, well, I'm the guy who literally has it in writing from a professional.
Well, there's two things. There's a quote that you have that you just said that I really liked. So seeing you for who you How did you phrase it? Seeing you for who you are.
Yeah, parents who saw me for who I was rather than who I wasn't, and teachers who defined me by my strengths rather than by my weaknesses.
But I think that's a lovely, that's a very memeable
oh yeah,
quote.
I have memed it before. I'm fairly certain.
Okay, we might need to share that then, because I like that. I like that idea that we want that obviously for parents who don't feel that they understand autism, and then they have a child who's recognised as autistic, and seeing them for who they are rather than who they're not, or what they can and cannot do, and so on. I like that. That's nice.
Yeah.
And also, I think it's fair to say you identify as a white male, and you're 36.
Yep.
So it's just goes to show again the issue with the incredibly narrow myths and misunderstandings about what autistic experience is, because otherwise you would be a prime candidate for being recognized as autistic. But it has been, as we're all aware, for sort of 70 plus years, such a narrow understanding that even as potentially a prime candidate as a white male, you still got missed, or at least misdiagnosed or misrepresented.
More than just a white male, also a white male with a mathematics degree. I couldn't solve Rubik's Cubes back then, but I was a huge chess geek as well, and also like roughly middle class as well. I basically matched all of the stereotypes that, basically my nickname at work was Sheldon. So that should be quite an indicator of just how, I'm saying this ironically, how autistic I was, in terms of how easy it was for other people to look at me and say, oh yeah, he's definitely autistic. Not her, because she's a girl, but Chris, that white male who's an enormous nerd with a master's degree. Yeah. So, like I said, even with someone like me, it took a long time to get there.
So just again, I guess that my point is it's just highlighting the issue, because we've talked with Kieran Rose a number of times about the issues of blaming women for being missed, like we're hiding our autism, and actually a lot of us haven't been hiding at all. We've been flapping in people's faces and still not recognised. So I just think it's just another nail in the coffin for the issue of non-autistic people not understanding autistic experience and being able to recognise or allowing us to recognise ourselves in a very authentic way. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's difficult talking about that, because on the one hand, you want to draw everyone's attention to it. On the one hand, I actually made a post earlier today that kind of alluded to this. You don't want to demonize the people who don't get it. The fact that being uninformed and being willfully ignorant are two completely different things. I shared a post that I wrote 7 years ago today, talking about how I had mild autism, and how, this thing that was wrong with my brain, and the stuff that I actually believed back then, because that was the extent of my knowledge back then. People,
that's a very different thing, and that's why Aucademy, one of our main ethos. What's the plural for ethos?
Ethos.
I have no idea. So anyway, one of the other guiding principles that I have, from the start, was gentle educating, for that very reason, particularly being much more gentle with newly discovered autistic people who see themselves as people with autism in quotation marks. And we're going to get onto this as well, because that was really, really interesting in your survey.
When we eventually start talking about the survey.
When we eventually get onto the survey. So it's because though they are not the target for busting necessarily the myths, and they are, but in a gentle way. It has to be gentle, because, like you say, it is not actually their fault. It's the narrative that's out there. But I'm much less. Sorry, say again.
It was with me 7 years ago. Got screenshots to prove it. Shared them earlier today.
But that exactly, we have to be very gentle with people, and my whole thing is always there's not just 3 types of people. You know, everyone's got that thing of like, there's 3 types of people. There's not. But my whole thing is there's 3 types of people. There's the one that's already on your side or singing from the same hymn sheet or whatever it might be. There's the ones that are just so stubborn in their narrative, in what they believe, that you just cannot shift their viewpoint or their
the people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Yeah,
exactly. And those people I don't waste my energy with. I have very little energy, very little spoons. As a disabled person, they don't get my energy or my time. But there's the third type of person, I know there's more than 3, but there's a third type of person who has a crack in their narrative, and they are looking, whether they know it or not, for a different narrative. Those people I've got all the time in the world for, because I think I will show you a different way and you do what you want with it, right? And they're the people you've got the time, the time for. But when it comes to professionals who make a living out of basically the emotional and cognitive labor of autistic people, diagnosticians and things like this, I'm much less gentle, I think. I'll still try and educate if they're interested, but I'm much less gentle, because I think that's a different kettle of fish. We're not talking about autistic people who need gentle education about what it means to be autistic.
I would say even then you do have to be a bit careful, because if you I was actually talking to a friend of mine yesterday about how we as educators make sure that we don't have our students falling victim to radicalization. And I am going somewhere with this, and the fact that
I'm following.
Someone who is trying to radicalize a young person might tell some bad taste jokes about a sensitive subject, like tell a joke about Indians, for example, which is unacceptable, but the teenager laughs because, well, pushing boundary jokes are funny when you're a teenager. That person then tells the same jokes to their parents and get told off for it. They say in front of their teachers and get detention for it. And then you end up the only people who will accept you for these things, which you misguidedly find funny at the time, are these people who won't judge you for it. Come on, you're safe to crack these jokes here. So I think we have a responsibility to not be the kind of people who reject that middle group of people who you're just mentioning, because there'll be plenty of, I'll say harmful advocates who would be very happy to accept those people. And I've been judged by those autistic types too, those self-diagnosed fakers, as I got accused of being the other day, as punishment for disagreeing with someone on something, even though, like I said, I do have a diagnosis from a professional consultant psychiatrist. But even then, even if it didn't, I don't think it makes an autistic person lesser just because they've not got access to a diagnostician. Anyway, so there are kind of common threads there. Gentle educating is brilliant, and we need to make sure that we're not, in our chasing of the righteous cause, ending up pushing these people towards people who, even with best intentions, a lot of the really damaging things. I made a post about this on Autistic Not Weird's Facebook page about a month ago, how I saw someone celebrate, quite genuinely, sincerely celebrating the fact that their son had recovered from autism. And it was truly meant as an expression of love. And it's so difficult when a lot of the most harmful stuff said about autistic people isn't said in a very nasty way. It's said with quite sincere love for the person, and that is a far more insidious thing to. Anyway, I'm getting away from my original point here. I'll say that even with the professionals, I'm not sure whether I'd use the word gentle, but to an extent giving them the benefit of the doubt to start with is, I think, ironically, before you made that point, I was actually about to say what my favourite experience of this kind of thing was, and it's when I was in India. I talked to, I won't mention by name, don't think it would be fair, even though he is a very autism positive, great person. And he had been I think, behavioural therapist. I can't remember his exact job title, but he'd been doing it for about 30 years, from a different generation, clearly loved working with autistic young people. And he gave his speech the day before mine, and he was talking about high-functioning autistic people and to how this person had a tantrum, the other things like that. And I was thinking, I've known you for a few days. You don't seem like the kind of person who would believe harmful things about autistic people. So anyway, after we got off stage, we talked for a bit, and then at a point that seemed natural in the conversation, so just so you know, autistic people don't really like the phrase high functioning because it's it kind of minimizes our struggles a bit. And his response was the best response I've ever seen from a professional. He immediately got out a notepad and pencil. Oh, thank you, Chris. What else?
Yeah.
Yeah. So at the age that he was, having been in his profession for 30 years, he was still very happy to adapt his practice. And yeah, legend of a guy actually. We talked a bit further about ABA, and his immediate comment was, "Oh yeah, I'm up against $1 billion industry here," in regards to him campaigning against ABA. So
yeah,
this non-autistic professional who's a behaviourist, etc. So yeah, there are such things as professionals who are on our side, but equally
I mean, maybe I
can
should
see why the concerns are there, obviously.
And Kelly here as well. So it's so important to understand this and create a bridge of understanding and empathy and not destroy it. I guess that when I'm saying that, because we, for instance, Annette and I, we were in Derby last week before. Time means nothing anymore. Like two Fridays and a Thursday ago. And the first day we had professionals, so over 100 professionals. And what we tend to do is, it is actually about translating. I'm constantly trying to think of ways to translate something into neurotypical so that they can understand what's happening and what we're trying to explain. And Annette's work around doing like mindful stimming to actually show professionals what that's like. And it was really, really great. So we were explaining these things, we're getting them to perspective take and understand why it's important to young autistic people, but particularly adults as well, to be able to stim safely and comfortably and things. And so with a room with over 100 professionals, a lot of them were really getting into it. Some of it was really lovely. We went round, we had a microphone, which was really weird and horrible. I don't usually like microphones. I'd rather have not an echoey hall, but a room where I can just talk loudly. But
an acoustic friendly hall.
Yes, whereas this was a really weird, long conference room, so we had to have a microphone, which was very bizarre. But we were going around asking people questions about how they found the stimming, how they understood why we did it, all this kind of thing. And a lot of them were like, because we give them stim objects that we bring our suitcase, and they were like, what is this? Where do I get it? This is amazing. I can't put it down. And really, really great people. And then there's always one who's just like, well, I thought it was really boring. And you're just like, right. It's those ones.
Can I help you with that? Just so I'm clear, are you committed to finding this boring, or is there? Yeah.
It was just really difficult. You can tell some of the professionals that had been told that they had to be there, and the ones that had made the decision to be there themselves. And interestingly, I had some very frustrating comments from a teaching assistant who, sadly, we know most teaching assistants are, and it's not their fault, but aren't given the training around what autistic experience really is. And how to support autistic pupils. And so it was quite frustrating because they were basically saying they knew everything that we'd already talked about, and it was just meaningless for them to be there. And I know that's not true, because I know some of the things that we were talking about, next to no one is talking about yet, because it's like really cutting edge stuff. So that just really frustrated me. So you just think there's some people, for whatever reason, you can't shift their narrative. But the ones that were like, this is amazing, what is this thing? Those people, like say, you've got all the time in the world for them. So I think, okay, I think I've talked about this before on Aucademy, which is that, you focus on the ones with a crack in their narrative, or the ones that are looking for something. They know that they're not happy with the medical narrative, for instance, that it doesn't mean what they want it to mean, or it's not doing what they want it to do, but they don't know what to replace it with. And it's like, oh, here's a new narrative, I'll teach you it. If you like it, take it away. So those you get on side, you give them a new narrative, and then they start to think for themselves, hopefully nice and critically. But the ones that are really stubborn, that just for whatever reason held incredibly strict biases and prejudices and things, that has to come from the top down. That has to be the local authorities and so on, they have to be making those changes, and those people will either toe the line or will be pushed out, because there's not really much you can do with somebody who has no interest in changing their narrative. I have no idea where we've gone with this. Right. It's already been an hour. Amazing. Right. On to the survey. Okay, right. Yes. So Chris did this amazing survey, people who've been here for while we've been chatting. And it's kind of a follow-up from 2018. I mean, why did you do a follow-up? Because that's not that long ago, really, in the grand scheme of huge surveys.
Well, in terms of academia, 2018 wasn't very long ago, but in terms of movements, 4 years can be a very long time. So I felt that, and also it's kind of like when you write a story and then a few months later you come back to it and you think, oh, no, I need to change this. And it happens every few months. I think George R. R. Martin once said, it's a good job I publish my novels once every however many years, because otherwise I'd still be editing them to this day. So you're always going to find places in your own work where you can refine it. And there's always going to be, in fact, there are things that I missed in this survey, which I, in hindsight, really want to insert and analyze and things, but I won't be able to do that until the next time I do a survey. But I've made notes for what to do next time. I'm not committing to doing one of these every 4 years, unless you give me a PhD for it. But
if you get funding and a load of time.
Oh yeah, that's what was I saying. Yes, the reason that I felt it was due for an update was partly because there's plenty of things that I A, knew that needed refining, and B, had the ideas and the ability to refine. And also the fact that, yeah, even though 2018, despite what it feels like, actually wasn't that long ago, but in terms of autism acceptance, it was a while ago. In fact, just look at the difference between identity first language versus person first language and language choice in general. There's a chart somewhere in there that compares the 2018 language opinions to the 2020, and there's a vast difference. A lot can change in 4 years. So I thought, either I'm going to be continuously thinking, I should do another one of those. And even when people say, oh yeah, that survey you did, it's 11,500 people, it was amazing. I'll always have that, yes, but I need to do another one. So I thought, you know what, let's just make the new one, and it'll drive you around the bend, and it'll sap all of your energy, and you will both love it and hate it in equal measure until it's out. And even when it's out, people will choose to reject it, which actually has only happened a very small minority of times. I know this sounds like a very cliche thing to say, but I am just overwhelmed by how positive the response has been. The fact that not only do people recognize and acknowledge just how much work went into it, but they also truly value it. And like I said earlier, there are people on Patreon and Ko-fi giving money as a thank you for it, and it is being seen as something that might actually, again, a bit of a cliche, actually make a difference to the way that people understand autism and the autistic experience. And like I said right at the beginning, in this month where you're getting lots and lots of information with not necessarily, you don't know how anecdotal it is or how representative it is or even how true it is. It helps to just have data. And yeah, I thought, well, I might as well put my nerd skills to use and spend a few months of my life doing it. And I'm very glad that I did.
I mean, the way you just described it, and you said about love and hating it and all this kind of thing, I was like, that's how you describe doing a PhD. Is that by the end we will me and then Annette will refer to our thesis at the end, we would refer to it as the feces. That how's your feces going? Don't ask. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about the feces. Like, it just gets to that point, because even though you start off doing something, like, you cannot do a PhD unless it's something you're really interested in and that you feel that you love, because by the end you will potentially hate it. And it's just the nature of things. And Katie's just saying here as well, you could do a PhD by publication. If you got this published, you could very well do most, if not all, of a PhD. It's definitely at the same level, and in some cases even postdoctoral. So there's definitely going to be call for that. So let's jump into it. before anyone gives you funding, and then you get on to doing even more with it. So I think just jumping right in, because I had my brief comment or note, which was, what were the main things that you found interesting, useful, and surprising? So what did you find interesting when you did this particular survey?
Okay. Interesting from a personal perspective or from a wider advocacy perspective?
Do you want to do both?
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Well, I found most of it interesting, really. And from a personal perspective, I'm interested in the religion one, and that rumor that autistic people are less likely to be religious. And well, according to the stats, well, yes, but that's not as big a factor as geography, for example, or even age, or whether you're LGBT plus. And in the article, I tried to just talk about the data rather than talk about me in it, but I felt that I need to basically mention that, yeah, those of us involved with organised religion do need to be doing a much better job of accommodating those who would want to love God but feel like they're not allowed to, or not good enough for God. Well, really, they're just not good enough for the churches that decide who is and isn't good enough. When meanwhile, I go to a church that attends Pride every year. So anyway, that's something I found interesting from a personal perspective. There was a bit of a limitation that the question was, I have religious faith, rather than I believe in God, which are two completely different things. So that's one that I found interesting to look into. I wasn't massively happy with what I saw, but then again, this is data. You need to be objective, and a lot of that involves being not happy with what you see. I do not like the fact that certain groups of people feel that. Well, okay, a part of it isn't whether or not they feel accepted into it, it's whether or not they actually just do believe or not. But I've believed for a long time that religion or faith is inaccessible to a lot of people based on how they've been treated by other people of faith, and we need to do stuff about that positively.
And that's quite interesting, because a few years ago I actually there was a talk at Parliament in relation to some of the Black communities and what they could do to make, for instance, their churches more accessible for autistic young people, because of that concern around making noise, if you're an autistic person and a child in a church and things like this, to make them more accessible. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about as well? So sort of churches
they didn't. Sorry, go on.
Well, it just is that idea around churches being more accepting and understanding of autistic difference.
It didn't quite go into that level of detail as literally analysing, I have religious faith, and then breaking it down by various background categories. But there is, I've been talking to other autistic Christians about the issue of accessibility in religion. That the church I used to go to before it was basically closed down by a cross between the pandemic and the Church of England's funding. It was called the Order of the Black Sheep, which is a very deliberately tongue-in-cheek name, but it is basically a church for those who don't feel like they fit in with the very mainstream stand-up, sit-down, sing hymns type of church. And big surprise, most of us either knew we were autistic or ended up discovering we're autistic at some point in the last 6 years. And a big bunch of us were LGBT plus. One of our regulars was, we had about 15, 20 people. One was trans. One of our vicars was non-binary as well. So there's a wide range of people who don't really meet as much as you have stereotypes of Christians. So there's that. There's I've just seen Andrew's comments. I'm sure it's a disability inclusive, but not always LGBT.
But it sounds like this is a church.
Yes, it had the feel of a community group, but it was officially a church. Even though for a while we met in a pub, it was a church accountable to the Church of England, led by a Church of England priest. I don't identify as an Anglican, by the way. I've never really identified with anything other than a Jesus-loving Christian. I don't really care about denominations, but yeah, that was it was a church that did not feel like a church, and that's probably why it's attracted the people who it did, myself included.
Lovely. I mean, that sounds important as well. So Andrew's comment just then was some churches are disability inclusive but not always LGBT friendly. So sounds like there's potentially a space that would be inclusive.
And I think not being LGBT friendly is basically a confession that you believe that God makes mistakes. I mean, no, if someone's gay, then I think we're advanced enough to acknowledge that people. Yeah, you are born the way you are. I say this as an autistic person who was born autistic. I didn't catch it from the vaccines or whatever, and so on. So either you choose to be LGBT plus friendly, or you claim that some people are not what God wanted them to be, which doesn't seem like a very Christian. Anyway, yeah, that is the one that I personally found interesting about the survey. Is it time to move on, do you think?
Sure, yeah. And I just want to flag here as well, Kelly. So Kelly's one of our, Kelly's an advocate. They're also one of our modmins and facilitators for our closed groups. So they just said here that we had a brief conversation about the cultural acceptance and accessibility of neurodivergent people in different religions during the Sunday social. So that's a Zoom that we hold 1 week. So they're just saying this is fascinating and there's definitely so much to it. And then Katie Monday, one of our hosts, said that come through non-binary vicar, which is fantastic.
They lead a church in Liverpool now, which is they've
Nice.
moved on to I say greater things. In my complete biased opinion, there was nothing greater than the OBS, but anyway, it was wonderful while it lasted, and we need more places like that. Anyway, so your original question was, what did I find useful? So interesting,
that was the
interesting and surprising. Yeah.
So then we could do
a third of the way through your question.
Yeah. So so what did you find useful? What was
okay?
I guess when I say
useful until last, because we will talk for ages about what was useful.
Okay.
But,
surprising.
What was surprising, because I can only think of one main example for this, was the double empathy problem, as described by Dr. Damien Milton. Now, my prediction was that when I asked these two questions, one of them for autistic respondents was, I find it easy to communicate with non-autistic people, or the opposite. I don't. It was between strongly agree and strongly disagree. And then
I often struggle to understand, communicate with non-autistic
that's it.
people.
Thank you. And then I asked in a different section of the survey I think it was to everyone in general rather than specifically non-autistic people, because there wasn't a section for specifically non-autistic people, but there was a section for autistic people, a section for parents and caregivers, a section for professionals, and you could fill in each of the ones that apply to you in your particular life. So there was nearly 500 people who were actually all three at once. And then there was a section at the end for all respondents. And
is this
the ones go on.
I'm just wondering, because I could potentially put it on the screen. Is it the one with you've got the 4 boxes, the 4 graphs next to each other? Is it that
There's
one?
probably a few like that, but yeah, I think yes, that particular question I'm talking about is I find autistic people easy to communicate with. I think that was the way the question was phrased. Now, what I was expecting is that the statistics would look the same in both questions. That autistic people would say, yes, I struggle to understand non-autistic people. And in my naivety, I thought that non-autistic people would say, I struggle to understand autistic people. Turns out that actually, no, it seemed like the opposite. Well, yes, obviously autistic people did say, generally speaking, they struggle to understand non-autistic people. But to varying extents, different groups of non-autistic people disagreed that they find autistic people struggle to understand, they find difficult to understand or communicate with. Now, some of the theories I had to explain this surprise was, okay, is the question really is this really concluding that autistic people are just easier to understand? It might be an advantage of being autistic. I had these various theories, and thing is, it flew in the face of Dr. Milton's double empathy problem theory so much that I reached out for comments. In fact, you can see it. I see his quotes a little bit further down the page. I edited since there to contextualize it, and yes, it's quite interesting. The general theory towards why the responses are the way they are is that non-autistic people think they understand autistic people. They think they're communicating well, but it doesn't necessarily make it so. And as Autistic Tip, which is a great username, by the way, said in a Twitter thread, the survey results doesn't contradict the double empathy problem at all. It actually demonstrates it beautifully. So yeah, that was a question, the results of which I found very surprising until I talked to Dr. Milton and various other autistic people put their insights in as well. And yeah, the other thing about it was, I wonder if non-autistic people might feel a lot more guilty about saying, actually, I find autistic people difficult to deal with, difficult to communicate with, and difficult to understand. Whereas autistic people wouldn't feel that kind of guilt at all. And that kind of guilt probably, for all I know, stops a fair few people from clicking agree, because you don't want to admit by a mouse click to finding autistic people difficult to communicate with. It's not something that people, especially the people who would fill in that survey and deeply care about autistic people, especially the autistic people in their own lives, it's not something you want to admit to. So I was wondering if that was a part of it as well.
So there might be two things there, and particularly when you think about the Crompton work, which showed that when you do have an autistic person and a non-autistic person, that cross neurotype communication breaks down. So you can't necessarily get away from that, because that's quite good evidence. Whereas this is about self-reporting. And like I say, it's potentially, but we can't necessarily know, one of two things. As Charlotte says here, the normies are in denial. They think they know what autistic people are thinking, for instance, or understanding our communication. So they're either in denial, or they just, are very poor at perspective taking, the irony, or it's desirable responding, that they, like you say, they don't want to be negative or say that they don't understand autistic people or whatever it might be. Because I just don't think we can get away from Crompton's work showing that the communication does break down when it's cross neurotypes.
Yeah, and it was occasionally one of the more difficult. Actually, I'm not sure whether it was difficult, because I don't really have much in the way of pride in general, or protection or ego towards things, including this survey. But one of the things that was occasionally difficult was me thinking, wait, is this a problem with the actual survey? Is there something in the collection of the data that's what are the limitations of this? So you'll find if when you read through the results, I do a lot of mentioning the limitations of the survey, and I felt I need to be quite careful with that, because I don't want to undermine my own way and say, oh well, you don't really need to take this seriously. But at the same time, I'm not going to pretend that there's reliability in places where there may not be. So, like I said earlier, the limitation of the religious question, it says, I have religious faith. It does not say, I believe in God. The limitation of comparing those two questions to examine the double empathy problem is, well, actually, to be fair, I don't think that was a limitation of the survey. I think that may be an issue with the nature of people who are responding to the survey, with the greatest respect to those who did.
It might be their interpretation of the survey as well, because ultimately this survey is written by an autistic person.
Oh, yes.
So they're trying to interpret.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah, that's why I tried to make it as clear and unambiguous as possible. And
then you clearly never read or had to do a non-autistic survey, because they're not usually that clear or unambiguous.
One thing I was very happy about while I was collecting the data and sharing the survey everywhere was people who said they were commenting on how clear and accessible the survey was, which was exactly what I was hoping for, and so I took it as a massive compliment. But yeah, there are plenty of ways to get surveys wrong. Like, how often do you feel this, that, or the other? And one of the responses being all the time. Like, well, no, it's not my every waking moment. Does all the time mean once a day? Does it mean most of the day? Does it
But
mean...
that's an autistic way of understanding the question, and a non-autistic person wouldn't think of it in that way, because
I'm wondering whether, maybe this is me struggling to empathise with a non-autistic person, but I'm actually wondering whether a non-autistic person would read all the time and think, wait, what exactly is that supposed to mean? Like, what's
No,
the
they don't.
underlying meaning behind
If
that?
you haven't already, please do watch Rachel Cullen. So we've had Rachel Cullen on a couple of times, and they do co-host with us now as well. But Rachel Cullen, so we've talked about this before, which is that you've got Damien's double empathy theorizing. Then we had work by non-autistic people showing that that double empathy problem is happening, but that's not telling you the why, the nitty gritty. And then Rachel Cullen's work is very exciting because it shows the why. And it's exactly what you've just done, which is that as autistic people, we get and understand that there's a lot of meaning to individual words. So we process language on the word level, according to Rachel's hypothesis, versus non-autistic people who process at the sentence level. And they get their meaning from what's not said, from the context, from the environment, from non-verbal cues like facial expression and things like this, whereas we get all of our context specifically from the words.
And that was one of the really big challenges of writing a survey that was supposed to be accessible to everyone: autistic people, non-autistic people, parents, professionals, people with no official link to autism, but they're filling it in because their friend's autistic. And how do you write something that's that applies to basically everyone? And especially since in pretty much every training session I deliver, I say, never trust the insight of anyone who claims to have all the answers for all autistic people. But when you're trying to cater for 11,500 people's communication styles, what do you do? And the closest you can come to it, well, first off, recognize that you will not get it right. Like the gender question, male, female, non-binary / other, you will still get one saying, well, actually, I don't think that those are sexes, not genders. And you can tell that they're coming into it with motives that lie or attitudes that lie outside of the survey that they're applying to the survey. And you will not satisfy 100% of the, but you can come pretty close. And what I tried to do was write questions which couldn't be seen by, and I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm stereotyping, but couldn't be seen by non-autistic people as, yeah, okay, but what does that really mean? What's the meaning underneath that? Couldn't be seen by autistic people as, wait, all the time? What on earth does that mean? And also is accessible to people who didn't speak English as a first language. There was a follower who translated the whole survey into Spanish, and that got like several hundred additional responses, which was massively valuable.
Sadid?
Yes.
Sadid? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm probably butchering their name because I'm really bad with names and languages, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yes, they're an amazing advocate, translating work all the time. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I was very grateful to them. What I was also very mindful of, sorry, just to finish the sentence, was I also need to make it accessible to autistic people with learning disabilities.
Yeah.
And and that doesn't mean, pardon the expression, but what other people would say, dumbing down the language. Like, no, that doesn't mean underestimating people. It means making it accessible to people. Yeah. Like, do you agree or disagree with, I like being autistic? I mean, obviously you are going to get people who even then cannot access it, but at the very least you can make it clear, unambiguous, and accessible to the widest range of people possible. And yeah, I think that was an art in itself, and it's something that I'm quite happy that people appreciate it. And
that will make you a very accessible researcher, because actually lots of research is not accessible. And me and Annette really struggle with that, to try and get research teams to understand what accessibility, which is a lot of the time actually quite straightforward, looks like. But yes, using clear language is good for everyone. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Including those normies. This is just a joke about the normies thing, by the way. Yeah. It's just this ongoing thing at the moment. Okay, so potentially that was about the surprising element.
It was.
So like I say,
And
Dublin.
now we go into the ones that are found useful, which understandably have multiple answers. Would you like to cover the ABA question, or the language choices question, or the one about whether you'd want a cure for being autistic, or the
I think
happiness differentials between those who...
you've got my key ones that I'd flagged that I found interesting, and potentially useful. So I guess that's where I get frustrated with some research, is that it's research for research's sake. And that frustrates me. Sometimes that might have some, value, but I think research needs to be useful. It needs to have some practical application, or something along those lines. So actually, I think I probably flagged quite a few. And then if there's any that you think we've missed, or I've missed rather. So I was really interested, I've done them in order, I guess, which is the number that like being autistic, for instance. So should we talk about that? Because that is interesting.
Yes. So I'm going to just go to the article quite quickly, just so I can get the stats right and see.
Yeah, and I can actually bring up...
Oh yeah, you can share it, can't you?
Yeah, that's what I thought, because then that will help people as well.
That's a better idea. I like being autistic. What I was predicting was the vast majority would say agree, and I say agree as opposed to strongly agree. There would be quite a substantial minority strongly agreeing, but, well, let's be honest, autistic people do struggle with autism-related issues, and whereas I would be one of the people who click strongly agree, 7-ish years ago I would have been neither, and 5 years before that I would have jumped between agree and disagree. So yeah, my prediction was autistic people in general would like being autistic, but only a substantial minority would strongly agree to it. And that's actually what happened. Have you got it in front of you, Chance? Yes.
Have I got the right one? Is that the right one?
Yes, you have.
I wonder if I can move us. Can I move us?
Can you do what, sorry?
Oh, I'm just seeing if I can move us on the screen, but I don't think I can, so I'm not going to worry. So I'm just going to zoom in instead.
Oh yeah, if you click the pictures, it zooms in and like loads the whole... Yeah, there you go. I made that in the interest of accessibility, plus copy pasting onto Twitter and other things. I made it so it's every picture you click in the article goes to the original file.
Fantastic. I'm going to also hide my bookmarks. Nobody judge me on my bookmarks. I have a lot of bookmarks. So yeah, so this, we're on the right ones.
Yes.
So talk us through this. It's very exciting.
Okay, so on the left, all 7,491 autistic respondents were asked, to what extent do you agree or disagree? I like being autistic. And yes, 22.5% strongly agreed, almost 42% agreed. 22.5%, almost the exact number that said strongly agree, were neutral about it. And they've got 8 and a bit % who disagree and nearly 4% who strongly disagree, plus the nearly 1 degree of people who didn't give an answer for whatever reason. So yeah, basically in line with expectations, but it does say quite unambiguously that the majority of autistic respondents did say, yes, I like being autistic. Now, you'll gather as you read through the article that I was very aware of the counter-arguments before they came, so I preemptively addressed some of them. And one that, actually, to be fair, I have not really seen this counter-argument being presented, except for once on an Instagram post from someone who clearly had not read the article. And you could tell by the fact they were giving criticisms of the data, which I just explained in the introduction. But yeah, as far as I'm aware, no one who has read the article has offered this as a counter-argument. But this is only the high-functioning autistic population, the ones who can complete a survey. My child with learning difficulties obviously cannot possibly like being autistic. So I preemptively isolated the autistic respondents who had ticked the box in the traits, or traits rather than conditions, academic learning difficulties. Like, yes, there's a case for arguing that autism is more difficult if you have academic learning difficulties, but life itself is more difficult if you have academic learning difficulties. So I thought I'd analyze them and see, are they more likely to dislike being autistic? And the answer I'd have to get the calculator out to think, yes, but only very, very slightly. There's less than 1% difference in strongly agree, exact 1% difference in strongly disagree. And yeah, those are the kind of numbers we're talking about. So
It's not
in fact, if you
huge
just look
differences,
at it visually, it
yeah,
looks the same.
yeah, and it's not huge differences, and there's no advanced statistical analysis here because you've got the percentages, but it might be that if you were to run this through statistical and like advanced statistical analysis, it's very hard to say, that there might be non-significant differences. Be quite interesting. Somebody would love to do stuff with that data.
Yeah.
Not me. I'm more qualitative now. Run away from the stats. So this is important. This is useful because it also leads on to other questions like, would you want a cure for autism if it existed? So let's go back to my notes. I'm going to move my notes over because they're going to flag on the screen probably. Yeah, they do. Let's move my notes. Nobody needs to see all my notes. So yes, very interesting. So they like being autistic. Then I've got a number of other things because I think it was in the order that I was reading them. So I'm going to jump actually from the order that I
was also quite selective. Yeah, if you go to the top of the article, there are hyperlinks to different sections of the article. I learned how to do that just for this 13,000 word article.
Oh, fab. Well, the thing I wanted to jump to then, because the next one I've got is like I was interested in the knew I was different, and
that's literally the next graph down.
But I don't want to jump to that quite yet because I guess I'm thinking it in terms of themes because of this idea of liking being autistic and then what you found about cure.
Oh yeah, so you could just search at the top for the word cure, but yeah, that big whole bunch of hits down there towards the bottom of the page. Yeah, here we go.
The cure question. This one?
Yes. So it's comes to think of it, I was expecting. I don't know. I'm not going to say I was expecting more people to agree or strongly agree. I was expecting at least a few more neither. But then again, I was also expecting the strongly agree to outnumber the agree because it's like I don't know. Occasionally, my predictions are wrong, and this is exactly why I have data to illustrate what's the what the truth actually is, what the closest we can access to the objective truth is. That's pretty much what most other people would expect. 55%, almost precisely, strongly disagreed with wanting a cure. Another almost 27% disagreed with wanting a cure, and the people who strongly agreed, less than 3%, and 5.5% agreed, leaving 9% in the middle who are neither. So,
and this is for everyone who maybe can't see the screen that well, is autistic people themselves.
Oh yes, this was. I asked this question 3 times. Once in the section specifically for autistic respondents, and that's one we're looking at. Later on, you're presumably going to load the one that said, if there were a cure for my autism, I would. Oh yeah, okay. Well, bookmarking that. The other 2 versions of the question were to parents and caregivers whether they would give it to their relative, and the third one was to professionals whether they would hope their clients or students would take it. So I asked it 3 different times so I could compare 3 different groups.
So is that this one, isn't it? So that's
this
if there
one
were
is
a cure.
Caregivers, yes.
Yeah.
And notice the sheer difference between autistic parents, because I think about 1 in 6 of respondents were autistic parents and caregivers of autistic relatives. I was not expecting that. That was a huge proportion of them being autistic parents of autistic children. And yeah, some were caregivers as opposed to parents, but the vast, like 95% of them were parents. But yeah, for those who can't see the data, the difference between the answers to if there were a cure for my autism, I would give it to my relative. Non-autistic, this is the one on the right, non-autistic parents and caregivers, by and large, disagreed. Roughly a quarter disagreed, roughly a quarter strongly disagreed. 11% strongly agreed, 15% agreed, leaving 20% in the middle. So it was far from unanimous, but a slim majority disagreed. So yeah, if you add them up, it's 51.5% disagreed against 26% approximately agreeing. But autistic parents and caregivers, 3% strongly agreed, 6% agreed, so 3% strongly agreed, 6% agreed, 10.5% were neither, 23% disagreed, 56% strongly disagreed. And if you were to see it visually, this huge tower that's more than double the size of the strongly disagree for the non-autistic parents, the conclusion is fairly obvious. Autistic parents are substantially less likely to want to cure for their relative.
Beautiful looking tower of a graph, isn't it?
Oh yes.
Of a bar.
Yeah, not quite as big as the vaccine one, where I had to change the y-axis to 90% to accommodate just how strongly people disagreed with it.
Okay.
But yes, so let's go for that's it. So going back to the autistic respondents, again, I anticipated the counter arguments before it came. Like, yeah, but these are only the high functioning people and so on. So it's not those poor non-verbal people with learning difficulties. So I isolated the non-speaking autistic respondents with academic learning difficulties, and I can't remember the specific numbers, but it's approximately the same. I think they were marginally more likely to want to cure, but in a barely statistically significant way, to the extent there's possibly even statistical noise, but can't remember the exact statistics, but you can tell visually it looks almost the same.
So, like I say, countering that argument, well, those so-called learning disabled autistic people would potentially want a cure. Well, actually, try asking.
Yeah, exactly. And even then, I think I mentioned this in the text of the survey, even then there's another counter argument that, yes, these may be non-verbal people with learning difficulties, but they know how to click a mouse. They understand the concept of what a survey is and so on. So no matter how much you argue against it, there'll always be some kind of, well, let's go even further back to it. But anyway, the paragraph I wrote about that counter argument was, well, okay, yeah, as much as I've made this as accessible as possible, there will be some autistic respondents who cannot take the test for take this survey for cognitive based reasons. Yep, fair enough. But we have enough data here from those with and without learning difficulties to make it basically quite irrational to claim that those who were unable to take the survey somehow have the complete polar opposite opinion to the vast majority of everyone else, including those with learning difficulties.
Which your comment in the survey, it's really good. It's a really good counter argument. It's like, really, would they be that polar opposite to these other autistic people with different profiles, which I think is really important and interesting. And if you're given PhD money, then you'll have time to work out a way of surveying those who might struggle with the way of being surveyed here, for instance.
Wouldn't that be incredible if we could find a way that would make surveys like this accessible to people who have never been able to take a survey before?
Yeah.
It may be a case that you'd need to accommodate different people differently depending on their individual needs, which, well, because, yes, autistic people are individuals, but also complex needs, often deeply individualized. So the answer would not be particularly simple. But
no, and it might be more
great if we could
more qualitative. Which means you might have to get out of your wheelhouse a bit with away from the numbers a little bit.
Yes, focusing on the experience, focusing intensely on the experiences of a small number of individuals rather than 11,000 of them, unless they give me a lot of time and funding for that kind of PhD research,
which would be epic. So yes, so I'm going to cross that through now because that was one of my points, which was interesting. So we're on to the interesting and useful, basically, that is useful because it's starting to provide support against, we had a whole issue with the Spectrum 10K. That's still an ongoing issue anyway. But the nature of what that research would be doing or saying about autistic people is going down the line of cure, even if that's not what they claim. And I mean, if somebody has to tell you that they're not in support of eugenics, then you have to be kind of concerned that they'd have to bring it up in the first place. But that's a different conversation. But just really important, because it's demonstrating, or starting to help in terms of demonstrating, that practicality of, well, why are you doing that research when actually what people might want is positive autistic identity, which is what we're going to move on to.
I think Spectrum 10K has already been useful to some extent, even though, well, yes, all of the counter arguments. I think, hopefully, the history books will see Spectrum 10K as a turning point in the ethics of autism research. The fact that 10 years, 15 years ago, Spectrum 10K would have gone ahead, and there may be a few dissenting voices, but it would have just happened. And so, let's just ignore those autists. They don't have much of a voice in the conversation anyway. Whereas these days, it's pretty much made it unacceptable in the academic field, which is often quite far behind like the social movement, just because, well, academia is a different sector. But even in the academic sector, it is now unacceptable for autistic people to not be meaningfully consulted. And people power even filters into academia these days. And that's, maybe a turning point, regardless of the future of Spectrum 10K. It's something that will be remembered.
Hopefully so. So that was, majority of autistic people like being autistic.
Yes.
Including autistic people who also have a learning disability.
Yes.
Both autistic people and non-speaking, autistic people largely don't want a cure if one were to exist. So that's really important. And then the other bit that I wanted to jump on that kind of connects, I think, would be moving on to ABA.
Okay.
Would that be right? Do you think there's another? I'm doing the thread of things that kind of feel that they connect well.
Honestly, the meandering of this chat tonight has been so all over the place that I really have no particular structure in mind for which order we talk about these in. So talk about whatever you want.
Okay. So it's proper jumping about now because I'm halfway down. So where are we? That's secure.
A little bit above that. That's where all of the mentions of ABA are. Well, not all of them, but you know what I mean.
Is this right? This is the one we want?
Well, that's the last of the charts in that section. In fact, a bit of a pro tip. It may be better to press the home button and go all the way to the top of the survey, go a few paragraphs down, and then you will see a little bit further all of those hyperlinks. So click ABA and it goes right down there. All in the name of accessibility and the fact that the survey was bloody long.
Right. So let's open some of these. The key ones. Yes, that's the key ones, isn't it? So that's the first one, I think. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
So here we've got autistic respondents versus non-autistic professionals.
Yes.
And who support, or the question is, I support the use of ABA for autistic children. And look at that beautiful from autistic respondents.
Y-axis goes up. And just a few percentage points before I would have had to increase it to 90, which is like I said, vaccine levels of strongly disagree. So anti-vax, disagreeing with the anti-vax. Anyway, I'm sure we'll get to the vaccines bit in a bit. But spoiler alert, the vast majority, as in above 80% of people, didn't just disagree, but strongly disagreed with concerns about vaccines causing autism. And that's why I need to adjust the y-axis. Anyway, let's go back to ABA. So, 79% of autistic respondents, so over 5,000 people, strongly disagreed with ABA. Obviously, this has been dismissed by a couple of commenters that I saw on Instagram. Thought, oh, yeah, but but these are the people who expressing all the concerns as, yes, read the article, I have addressed these. But to be fair, it was an Instagram post which didn't have a clickable link to the. Well, actually, no. To be fair, they equally wouldn't have been likely to click the link even if there was one, because again, committed to misunderstanding people. Anyway, I'm getting off track again. So yeah, the higher the percentages, the less you can ignore them, really. But yeah, on top of the 79% of people who strongly disagreed, there were 9% of people who disagreed. 8% were neither, and in terms of who agreed with the use of ABA for autistic children, just over 2% agreed and 1.5% strongly agreed. So you're talking just under 4% of here. So 1 in 25 autistic people approves of ABA. Nearly 4 out of every 5, strongly.
Remembering this is over, how many did you say? 7,000 and how many autistic people?
Call it 7,500 or 7,491.
Okay, so nearly 7.5.
With the caveat that some of them didn't answer the question, but yeah.
Yeah, so nearly 7,500 autistic people, but your maths is going to be my maths are terrible. I don't know how I got advanced statistics. So 107 plus 144, please.
177 plus 144. Well, that'd be 251.
So that's 251 people
out of 7,500
that potentially agree with the support of ABA. You know, that's
4%. Like, have 25 autistic people in a room, one of them would agree with ABA, approximately.
It's just, yeah, fascinating stuff. So then we're looking at comparing it with the non-autistic professionals.
Yes, I found it most valuable to compare the what is often seen as the two sides of the argument. It's always the non-autistic professionals versus the autistic respondents, but basically the people who are you would imagine would be most likely to support ABA non-autistic professionals. Even then, by far and away the most popular, it was not an outright majority, but 43% strongly disagreed. 16, well, nearly 17% of people disagreed. Add those together, you do have an outright majority. You've got almost exactly 60% of non-autistic professionals disagreeing with the use of ABA. Yes, nearly 14% strongly agreed and almost 10% agreed. But, well, honestly, 24% agreeing against 60% disagreeing.
It's interesting. I wonder what did you have this question in the 2018 survey?
Yes, I did. I don't remember how it compares but back then, if I remember rightly, actually, I don't think I differentiated it to the degree that I did here.
And I think it's important because I'm actually going to use this, by the way. I'm going to use this and obviously cite you because I've been asked by an education and learning service because they want to explain why they don't want ABA and PBS. So applied, for those who are potentially not aware, so ABA, applied behavioural analysis, and PBS is just another form, basically, which is arguably positive behavioural support. But it just focuses on changing the behaviours of autistic people, which is actually quite damaging. And so, yes, I've been asked, can you please put together some evidence from different perspectives so that we can put this to the people in our local education services to say, we don't want ABA and PBS used with our young people. So I will be using this.
Brilliant.
And it is very interesting that it's the professionals as well, potentially not wanting to use it either. Now, I'm hoping that that's less about social desirability, responding in a way that they know autistic people want to hear. But that is always one of the things that we have to be conscious of when we do research, particularly when it's self-report. So what about those autistic respondents who have personally experienced ABA?
Oh, bloody hell, yes. So the common counter-arguments among ABA apologists, and I'm going to call them apologists rather than supporters. That seems like an accurate way of phrasing it. Correct me if I think I got it wrong, but I think it feels right. But yeah, ABA apologists will often say, yeah, but all these people who are complaining about ABA, have they really been through ABA themselves? And, well, if you look at the statistics in the survey, quite right, the majority of the autistic people in this survey had not been through ABA themselves. And I knew that was going to be the case because, well, it's just general demographics and the fact that ABA may be common, but it's not so common that basically every autistic person will have gone through it. So yeah, with that in mind, I recognize that I would need to isolate those. Yeah, the whole reason behind me asking the question, what therapies have you had? There's not much I can really do with that information beyond what I did here. Isolate the ones who have personally experienced ABA and then see what their responses are. And yeah, it turns out that 62% of autistic respondents who have personally experienced ABA, so we're talking about 341 people, if I remember rightly, 62% of them strongly disagree with its use for autistic children. Another 9.33% disagree with it. 11%, 33 people strongly agreed, and 7% agreed. So yeah, 18% versus 71 and 2/3%. Yeah, it is quite noticeable, of course, that 62% may be a lot, but it's not quite as high as 79%. So you could, if you wanted to be really manipulative, you could say autistic people who have experienced ABA are less against it than than autistic people in general. And well, yeah, you're technically correct, but I don't think it's much of an argument when 62% of people strongly disagree with it.
And I think this will then lead on to some of the other things, which is in a minute we'll talk about. I'm going to try not to go for too much longer because I'm going to get moaned at about dinner, but there's just so many interesting things in this survey. I mean, it's a very long survey for anyone who hasn't had a look yet. It is so much information that is so useful, and there's no way we were going to cover all of it anyway. So we're just trying to pick out, I guess, the key things. But it might be that there's some elements like learning whether your autistic had a positive impact on you. It might be, and probably will be the case, that if you've been through ABA, maybe you don't feel positive about being autistic. So they might have been that minority.
Oh, that's a good point.
Right. So then
occasionally someone gets me, have you thought about doing this? And you'd think that'd be a complete pain in the ass. Like, oh, look, come on, I spent months doing this. It's 13,000 words long. But no, honestly, occasionally they do appeal to the geek and the nerd in me. I'm a geek and a nerd at the same time. But for those wondering what the difference is, nerds are nerdy about academic things and geeks are not necessarily academic. So I'm a nerd for maths, but I'm a geek with my Rubik's Cubes. You could argue, am I a chess nerd or a chess geek? That kind of straddles the line between both of them. Anyway, what was I saying?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah. I mean, I'm not actually trying to say you should go and do, you should go and do more research if you get PhD funding, but...
Yeah, occasionally someone does make a comment like, have you considered doing this? And I think, oh, yeah, it's possibly too late to put it in the survey, but I'll analyse it out of interest. And the one that you suggested, what if I compared the responses to... Well, if I isolated the group of those who have experienced ABA and asked them the question, analyse their responses to the question, I like being autistic, or agree between strongly agree and strongly disagree. Yeah. It'll be quite interesting to see whether, don't know, how big would the difference have to be in order for ABA to accurately be seen as a factor in that?
I mean, it would really depend as well about, again, if you want to go down a more qualitative route, and then you had Katie Monday, who was like, if you want to do more qualitative stuff, they'd be interested as well. Because what I'm thinking is potentially, again, if you do get funding to actually do funded work like this, is that you could then have that opportunity to see if there are individuals within the larger survey who would be interested in doing either like interviews, or so that you could actually dig deeper into some of the findings that you find that are interesting. So yeah, that's just some thoughts around why potentially that 33 people and 21 people here might be in support of the use of ABA. And, you know, it depends on things that they might be still in that narrative. So I think somebody here said, let's be honest, most of the people that have had ABA are still in a conditioned paradigm, potentially in abusive relationships. And when I think when Amanda says that, you know, just in that sense of seeing autism as a negative and a deficit is can actually be quite damaging. So internalized ableism, you know, all sorts of things might be happening there.
So move on to the graph on the right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So comparing. Yeah, I did 3 sets of charts, each comparing 2 groups side by side. This one compares the responses of autistic people who have personally experienced ABA to the parents of autistic children who have experienced ABA. And yeah, among the parents and caregivers, it's the agree response that win, inverted commas, in this case. It's 24% strongly agree, 21% agree, and then there's nearly 9% that disagree and 26% that strongly disagree. So that you're talking about 35% disagree of parents of children who've experienced ABA, 35% disagree with its use, and 45% agree with its use. So if you were to look at that graph in isolation, actually, no, I'm going to correct my sentence halfway through. What I was about to say was you might think that ABA isn't that bad, but no, if you hide all of the other data and you just look at this, that is not exactly a firm encouragement, and it doesn't really sing the praises of ABA that much. When
actually, that's quite interesting, because if ABA were this amazing thing, then yes, you would expect to see strongly agree and agree outweighing.
Yeah.
So that's quite interesting.
I think the thing is with graphs like this is that the graph on the right looks very pro ABA compared to the one on the left, but it's not.
No,
it's
just not as strong a feeling against or for.
And the implication of this, and I know that the counter argument is, well, what people answering on the left went through old ABA and those on the right experienced new ABA, but I'll get to that in a moment, trust me.
We'll get to that, yeah.
But yeah, the implication here is that it looks great for parents, but it's not great for the person who is experiencing it. So it has the appearance of being great. So there's a lot of damage that you don't see in ABA.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that must be a very difficult thing to go through the mind of a parent whose child is in ABA. The fact is, but I'm one of those agree or strongly disagree people. My child can't be in that 62% who strongly disagree, can they? I mean, they look so happy. They're so
and there's a number of things there as well. So while, like you say, actually, when you compare them, then it feels like there's this stark difference. But actually, if ABA were this amazing thing, then you potentially would expect the parents or caregivers to be much more strongly agree and agree. Yeah. But there might also be that difference because who, as a parent, wants to consciously acknowledge that they may have put their child through something that they shouldn't have.
Reminds me of what I was saying. I remember ages ago now when I mentioned the post I shared earlier today about how people's perspectives and opinions and language choices and everything else change over time. And with that comes a responsibility for us to, like I said, gentle, I'm not even sure I'd use the word correction, but informing people. I was talking to a friend yesterday. This is the same friend I was mentioning earlier about a very similar topic. And she mentioned having been in a group where a parent says, my child's been doing ABA for the last 3 months, just generally as part of the questions. At least one autistic respondent replied with, you're abusing your child. Well, I was about to say with no further context or background, or even if there was, how is a parent going to react to that sentence? They're immediately going to try and block out everything following that, because even, let's, for argument's sake, say that the person is right in saying that. Even then, does that magically mean that the parent's going to be receptive to that?
Yeah.
No, I mean, we can give our damning perspectives on ABA as much as we want, but we've got to do it in a way that's accessible and non-judgmental, even if we believe that the parent has made a mistake. Oh yeah, and it's also leaving aside that the parents may have been led into making that mistake by very well-spoken people with lots of letters after
Exactly.
their last name.
And I want to make that point, actually, because one of our lovely commenters saying, oh, that's so sad, the parents who don't want the child they got. I don't feel that that's what parents, particularly who aren't aware of the diversity of the autistic narrative, that it doesn't have to be this scary, awful deficit disorder experience, this thing. Where was my train of thought, Chloe? The ones that are scared, they don't know a different narrative. They then are so worried, so scared, and they're being told, like you say, by a professional, by teachers, and you know, education, potentially educational psychologists and so on, that their child needs this ABA and it's going to help them. You know, those people aren't saying to them, we are trying to make your child look as non-autistic as possible. They will be saying, we will help them with the behaviours they struggle with and things like this. So those parents aren't knowingly being abusive. And I think that's something that we really struggle with, because we know it's abusive. So, but those parents, I don't think that they would put their children through abuse if they knew.
And let's pretend for a moment that ABA were literally, like, according to criminal law, classed as abuse. It wouldn't be something you could prosecute the parents for, because they've been told under what is perceived to be reliable guidance that this is the gold standard treatment for autistic people, and it's going to help them. Yeah, the fact that they're putting their child through ABA is a sign that they want to help their children. It feels uncomfortable saying that sentence, but from their perspective, given how ABA is advertised to them, it is a sign that, yes, they want what is best for their child. That's why they're putting them through ABA, which they are being led to believe is the right route for their child's future. So the question is, how do you respond to that, to a parent who is honestly doing what they believe is best? You don't just say, you're abusing your child. You point out the dangers and the danger that a child may be in, but in a way that isn't going to shut down the conversation or panic them into not being able to listen to autistic perspectives.
And importantly, give them other narratives, other options.
Yes.
You know, explaining that it's not, you know, ABA is not necessary. You know, if as long as it's not an ABA perspective or approach, you know, maybe they'll want a speech and language therapist, maybe they'll want an occupational therapist, maybe they'll want, you know, those sorts of people might be quite helpful dependent on that person's challenges. But giving those other options. We could definitely be here with a whole just talk about this. So let's jump on to, because you wanted to preempt what you potentially thought might happen. So let's talk about this.
So, old ABA versus new ABA. And obviously that there was no guarantee of absolutes here. Obviously, ABA looks different depending on what practice is doing it. But as much as you can generalize, those who are adults are likely to have experienced old ABA, and teenagers and children are likely to experience new ABA. So I divided the data set into autistic responders aged 20 plus and those aged 19 or younger. And turns out that these were the autistic responders who had personally gone through ABA. So you're talking about 200-ish people on one side and a surprisingly lower number on the left. You're talking about 50-ish, perhaps above. But still, with results as stark as this, is it really a matter of, there aren't enough respondents? Because if you get these kind of results with 50, then what would you expect with 50,000? Bloody hell, the thought just crossed my mind of 50,000 young people going through ABA, and it was horrifying.
That's
Anyway,
horrifying.
so
Well, I mean, I just want to actually flag, because somebody in the comment section, where was it? It might have been Bobby, was just explaining that
Bobby's
actually,
watching.
Sorry, say again.
Oh, Bobby's watching. Hello.
Yeah. But that sadly, a lot of the time, parents don't even know that their child is being put through forms of ABA, and that ABA is quite insidious now, because it's in some forms of education or educational methods and tools and things like this. So I think it's quite interesting, because people might be going through or experiencing forms of ABA, but not actually being aware of it, because it's not being called that, and it's been called PBS, and which is the positive behavioural support, which is just rebranding ABA, and a number of other things. Yeah, sorry, I cut you off, but
that's right. I'm also thinking of the there's a bit that's kind of the opposite way around as well. There's small encouragement in this. There are providers in America which call themselves ABA, but actually are not ABA, and they hate the practice of ABA. The reason they call themselves ABA is because it falls under insurance.
Yep.
So there's that as well, and I don't think it's talked about very much, and I think it's perhaps possibly in their interest for it to not be talked about very much. But yeah, it kind of speaks to how complex this question is, that there is no one-size-fits-all old ABA that all respondents will have experienced, and it's the same with new ABA as well. But you can say something about the attitudes associated with it, perhaps. Anyway, so according to statistics, the autistic respondents aged 20 plus, almost 65% of them strongly agree with its use on children, and 9% disagree. And nearly 12% strongly agreed, and nearly 7% agreed. Now, on the right, the admittedly small number of autistic children and teenagers who responded to the survey who are likely to experience new ABA, nearly 8% agreed and strongly disagreed, each. Nearly 12% disagreed, and 52% strongly disagreed. So again, if you wanted to be irresponsible with reporting, you could say, oh, so new ABA is better received among autistic people than, well, yes, but how did I phrase it in the article? I don't think it's quite a glowing compliment that only a small number of young people who have been through new ABA strongly disagree with its use on children. So yeah, there's a case for saying maybe new ABA is less damaging or less well received than old ABA. But well, I don't think that's particularly news, because most treatments of autistic people was worse in days gone by. But still, with a slim majority strongly disagreeing and 60 to 63% disagreeing in general, it doesn't look good for the ABA profession if that's the response.
Well, I mean, again, it's, even if you want to say, well, there's still some people who strongly agree. Well, if this ABA is so amazing, you would expect people to feel positive about it. It's done wonders for that person's life, and well, it's not, because otherwise you would expect to see some agrees and strongly agrees. Well, much larger bars anyway. So damning report for ABA there. Anything else you wanted to say about ABA, actually?
No, I think we've done that one to death.
Okay. Good. To death, everybody. Jump on it and use it where you need it, those that lovely bar chart. So the things that I found quite interesting and useful in what I'm interested in. So I always say this, that particular advocates and autistic advocates and academics as well, actually, we end up with something we're particularly interested in. So Kieran Rose is really, really interested in masking, and I'm really, really interested in this idea of basically fostering positive autistic identity via culture, community and space for psychological well-being. They're all kind of tied in with one another. And so I was really interested in things like learning that the person was autistic had a positive impact. And I made a little note that, is this about the protective properties of identity first language? Because this is something I
was wondering when we were going to get to that.
It's my favourite bit. What bit would it be under if I'm clicking?
It would be language choices.
Language choices, lovely. So this is a very big bar. This is not the bar that I was looking at particularly.
Yeah, there were kind of two sections to the language choices questions. There was language choices in general, and there was specifically IFL versus PFL.
Yes.
This is what we were talking about earlier. I can't remember whether we were recording at the time, but when I said that one of the reasons that I did a new survey only 4 years after the previous one was because in some areas, yes, there is a huge discrepancy already. In fact, look at the change from, well, even back in 2018,
so for people,
there was a slim majority. Yeah, a slim majority. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, for people, you've got a green bar, which is representing people who responded in 2018 to Chris's original survey. And then the blue bar is being compared with the blue bar, which is the 2022 respondents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there will come a chart later that compares directly IFL versus PFL, but the use of autistic person went from 60% in 2018 compared to 55% for person with autism, but 60% to 84%, I'm rounding these to the nearest percentage point, and use of person with autism went from 55% down to 25%. Very, very dramatic change over 4 years. And that is, the drop in person first language. I should also say that one thing to bear in mind of this is these are undifferentiated results. So these are all respondents together. And there was a substantially higher proportion of autistic respondents this time than before. But even then...
But this is everybody. This is including the non-autistic respondents, which is really exciting.
Now, what's interesting is that since 2018, I think, let's just say, the reputation of Hans Asperger has been
tarnished.
Somewhat tarnished, and also the use of the term Asperger's is like a lot of people will jump on you for using the phrase Asperger's because, well, Hans Asperger was a Nazi, which I don't know whether we know that for certain. I think what we're able to determine was that, well, yeah, he was a member of the Nazi Party, but I think every adult male was back then. But and also, he seems to have been given the impression of somewhat. Given the impression I get is that even if he wasn't a Nazi, he was quite happy to go along with stuff to advance his career. But honestly, even if it were, in fact, it should have been called Wing syndrome after Lorna Wing, perhaps. But obviously, she didn't want to name it after herself. But even if it's been called Wing syndrome, it still would have fallen out of favor because, well, medically it's no longer diagnosed, and also it's kind of fallen out of favor with the autistic community as well. But anyway, given the complete tarnishing of the Asperger's diagnostic label, you can pretty much very nearly compare the downfall of Asperger's to the downfall of person with autism. There's only a few percentage points difference. And high functioning went down. I was actually surprised it was as high as 4. Actually, wait, maybe it does surprise me that it was that high in 2018. 41% saying they used the phrase high functioning back then. But yeah, again, there's a higher autistic representation this time. But again, even then, 15% this time. It's been thirded, basically, in 4 years.
So basically, everything's dropped except high and low support needs and autistic person.
Yes.
Some positive change advocates who have been pushing we've all been pushing so hard for change, and I feel like this is a nice validation. Thank you. It's validating, Chris, to see that actually we've had some impact, because I think we have. I don't think it's unfair to say that the change is the result of autistic people being.
I think that's
advocates.
a perfectly accurate thing to say as well. If I suppose a thought experiment would be if all autistic people just had kept quiet for the last 15 years, what practical differences would we see in the autism scene now? And I'm fairly certain that no one will be saying autistic person. So yeah, it could only have been the voices of autistic advocates mentioning it, because I don't think people without the ability to listen to autistic people would have come to the conclusion themselves.
No. And I think, is this the other one that's the most useful? Because there's obviously other. Which bars do you think are the most useful to show?
Let's open all of them, then just click between them. So I think, are those the only ones? Oh, except for that one.
And this one,
that's the most useful, but I'm saving that till last.
Yes, that's my favourite. It's very exciting.
Okay, so these are the charts that directly compare identity first language to person first language. And yes, this one differentiates between autistic people, non-autistic parents, and non-autistic professionals. And there isn't much overlap, because obviously you couldn't answer the survey being autistic and non-autistic at the same time. You could, in theory, in fact, plenty of people were non-autistic parents and professionals at the same time. But I think that's neither here nor there in terms of interpreting the data. So the 76% of autistic people only used autistic person, and another 15% used that in addition to person first language. So yeah, you're talking about 91% of autistic people use identity first language, the vast majority of whom use it exclusively. And nearly half of non-autistic parents use identity first language exclusively, with another, well, again, rounding up to whole percentage points, 19% using both IFL and PFL, and 41% of non-autistic professionals are using it. So again, if you only look at the blue bars there, I mean, it may not be an outright majority of non-autistic professionals using identity first language, but it is the most popular results. And I think what we're led to believe is that non-autistic autistic people use IFL, non-autistic professionals have been taught to use PFL, and parents, it can change depending on who their main influences are, and also obviously their own personal opinions about what autism is. But yeah, in each case, IFL wins, in inverted commas. It's got the most votes, certainly. So,
I mean, being skeptical, I would still be a bit skeptical around the non-autistic professionals. Were they just saying that because they think that's what autistic people want to hear? What do they do in?
I hope so. I hope that is exactly the reason they're using it. I hope they are saying, I'm saying that because I know autistic people want to hear it.
I guess I meant in terms of ticking the box on the survey. I'm hoping that's a reality in terms of they do largely only use identity first language would be nice.
It's difficult because I don't want to completely dismiss the issue of would people pretend that they believe certain things in a survey that's anonymous and I can't possibly identify who they are. I don't want to completely dismiss that because, well, I would certainly wonder things like that when I'm filling it in. But is it does it have a negligible impact on the data, or is it something to be concerned about?
You certainly wouldn't see, I don't think you'd see as large numbers in terms of comparing anyway. So the non-autistic professionals are still, I think your bars are very exciting.
Yeah. Actually, come to think of it, assuming that, let's pretend that there were loads and loads of non-autistic professionals who are just kind of telling me what they thought autistic people want to hear. That would, of course, reveal that they know what autistic people want to hear.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is a positive.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, and changes between 2018 and 2022. Yes, this pretty much says what two graphs ago said in terms of the advancement of IFL versus the decline of PFL, and it just says exactly the same thing, but split among autistic respondents, non-autistic parents, non-autistic professionals. And what I'm interpreting from this is that the change, how to phrase this? It feels to me like there are differences between autistic respondents' opinions and non-autistic respondents' opinions, but you can tell from this that that's largely because everyone else is playing catch up. The fact that, in fact, rounded to percentage points, 52% of autistic people in 2018 exclusively used IFL. These days, 49% of non-autistic parents exclusively use IFL. So there is quite a lot of catch-up there. I felt it was important to show this graph because I think it would be a mistake to look at this graph and think, oh, those non-autistic parents, those non-autistic professionals, they're not quite in step with autistic opinions, when really, you can see the movement there.
But they've moved.
Yeah, they are moving in the same direction as autistic people. It's just taken them longer because obviously autistic people are leading the charge, so to speak. So obviously everyone's going to be I don't want to say a little bit behind because that sounds patronizing, but the general consensus of the autistic community is filtering out into the autism community, if you like.
Positive movement, yeah.
Yes.
Fab. Now this one.
Oh,
I
yes.
like this one. This one's very exciting.
It occurred to me a few years ago that, so I wonder if there's a self-perception difference between those who see themselves as autistic people and those who see themselves as people with autism. So I thought, well, you know what? I've got enough questions in this survey to actually analyze this. So these are two graphs, and this is going back to that very first question in the survey, agree or disagree, I like being autistic. So on the left, you see a graph of the responses to I like being autistic among those who use identity first language. On the right, responses to I like being autistic from those who use person first language. You can see, and it's not a like overwhelming unanimous decision here, but you can tell that there is a difference. In fact, some bits where the difference does stand out, look at the strongly agree. So 26% of autistic people strongly agreed with liking autistic. 7% of people with autism strongly liked being autistic. 11% of people with autism strongly disagreed with liking being autistic. 3% of autistic people strongly disagreed with liking being autistic. So, yeah, there is, and again, not unanimous. There were 37% of people with autism did say that they like being autistic, which is obviously a lot less than the 70% of autistic people who like being autistic. You can't quite say it's unanimous because let me just do the maths quickly. Yes, those who use person first language did still try and use the correct terminology, but there was still a even then not a majority. It's 37% against 29%. So yeah, those who use person first language who liked being autistic did outvote those who use person first language and didn't like being autistic, but still it doesn't match up with the overwhelming majority of autistic people in general, and certainly not those who use identity first language. So yeah, what I'm interpreting from this, with obviously the disclaimer that not all people with not everyone who refers to themselves as a person with autism hates being autistic, etc., etc., etc. Disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer. What I'm drawing from this is that there is a very strong argument for claiming that the use of identity first language, claiming the identity of an autistic person, is a sign of self-acceptance.
Yes.
And that's why I believe we should be promoting it.
Katie Monday has flagged, and we can do this statistic analysis if you ever wanted to, which is basically the crossover, the comparison between people who don't like being autistic, would take a cure, had ABA, and identify as person with autism, would be really interesting to see if those things would culminate in actually probably potentially poor well-being as well, because psychological properties around being an autistic person who's part of the community, who's got a sense of belonging. My argument is that it can be quite difficult to have a sense of belonging and deep connection with a people if you are a person with autism, because it can be quite isolating. So my note I made to myself was protective properties of identity first language, but it's not just about identity first language though. It's the narrative that comes along with that. There's a lot that goes into that.
One thought that just popped into my head while you're saying that. Another thing that there was a question. There was statements that I asked to non-autistic. What was it? No, I think I did ask this to. Did I ask it to everyone or just parents? But the statement was, "I value the input of autistic people, autistic adults," and to the autistic respondents, I said, or was it to everyone? Oh, I can't remember the specifics. But there were basically two questions there. One of them was, I value the input of autistic adults. And the other one was, oh, there it is. Non-autistic parents of autistic children should have their voices valued in the autism discussion. The context behind these two questions was that, you know just as well as I do, that the advocacy scene is bloody ugly at times. Autistic people attack parents. Parents attack autistic people. You get... and I actually think both of these comments are just as offensive as each other, even though autistic people may disagree. Well, obviously, people are going to side with their own side. But anyway, non-autistic parents saying, you don't understand autism because you're not like my child, and autistic people saying, you don't understand autism because you're not autistic, your child is, so you just look at it from the sidelines, you don't live with autism. I think that is also deeply offensive. Speaking from as the partner of a non-autistic woman with an autistic stepdaughter, she absolutely lives with autism. She's a very autism positive person and everything else. But I think it's not sure trivializing the right words, but it's certainly harmful to claim that those who spend their whole lives, like quit careers, like my partner did, in order to look after autistic children, saying you don't understand autism. Of course, I see it as equally invalidating as you don't understand autism because you're not like my child. Yeah, well, I have a sense in my head, but I'm not sure what I should say, because it may need to come with a trigger warning, what I was thinking. But yeah, it's comparing high-functioning autistic issues with low-functioning autistic issues may not give the impression that you think it will. There's very specific troubles, and to be frank, high suicide rates among high-functioning autistic people that by and large, you're less likely to get among those with complex learning disabilities. So, yeah, both comments are massively invalid. I'm going way off topic, but basically, yeah, the reason I asked these two questions was to see, is there truly a real divide between autistic adults and parents of autistic children, or is it just the loudest voices getting heard? So, yeah. Okay, I'll go through the graphs, but the reason I even raised the subject was you mentioned... was it? He was in the comments who mentioned it'll be good to compare. Was it Katie? Yeah. That's it. Katie Monday suggested it'll be good to compare those who had ABA, did not like being autistic, everything else. I'm thinking, let's take the autistic people who do not value the input of autistic adults. Yes, that's it. Because I asked this question of all respondents because I wanted to see how the parents responded, how the professionals responded, and so on. But by its very nature, that meant the autistic respondents were responding to this as well. And there were a fair few autistic respondents who strongly disagreed with valuing the input of autistic adults. Are they autistic people, or are they people with autism? It'll be interesting to analyse that as well.
So many possibilities. But
Yes.
I'm being called for my dinner now because
Okay.
I knew this was going to happen because it's too interesting. For things that people that we just weren't going to get through, things that I also found really interesting. Actually, just go look at the survey, but go away and look at the important things that Chris mentions about how many of us know we're different from a young age, and the discussion around, yes, autistic people should know. When you know as an adult that your young person is an autistic person, then they need to know. So that's really interesting to go and have a look at.
May I present a tiny caveat to that?
Yeah.
The fact that, generally speaking, yes, all things being equal, yes, the moment you know your child's autistic, tell them they're autistic. But practically speaking, of course, it is worth, if you feel you need it, taking a bit of time to understanding autism yourself, because you'll be the primary source of information that your child comes to learn about autism from. So if you need some time to learn about what autism truly means, and if you need some time to converse with autistic people about it, then yes, do that. But the general message, obviously, I'm guessing Chloe was conveying, is don't avoid telling people they're autistic. Even if you need to bide your time a bit whilst learning about it, don't avoid telling them about it. That helps basically no one.
Yes, the caveats, the important caveats. We could do a whole talk on just that. We
We
have
do a whole
covered
talk
how,
on just about anything.
this is true. We had two videos, one with a young person and one with Melanie Hayworth, about how do we explain autistic experience to young autistic people so that they know. And Melanie was also quite useful because they explain it's not one conversation. And if you get it wrong the first time, that doesn't mean you don't have that conversation again.
Of course, yeah.
Which was really, really good. Because he keeps yelling at me now because my dinner's ready. So that was fantastic. But I still want to do my favourite last question, which is, what is your favourite stim? Because that's what I like to find out what other people's stims are.
Okay, well, if I have a cube with me, it's this, obviously. And that's the really obvious predictable answer. But if I don't have a cube with me, then it's doing this with my fingers while I'm walking, basically as if I'm playing bass guitar, just doing this, and it's satisfying, and it helps me to focus as well. And I'm reminded for some reason of a while ago when I said one thing that's great about the winter months is that I can start steering my fingers and people think that I'm just warming my hands up, so the judgment is less. But then I started working in an autism specific school. I just do this, and this is another thing that I like doing as well, like flicking fingers and thumb against my other hand like that. I do that in school. No one cares. Yeah. Autism. I am, as far as I'm aware, I'm certainly the only openly autistic member of staff at my school, but they get it. That's really nice.
And actually, it was. Oh, we'll come to your final question, Si. Hold on. I love it because for me, the snails go backwards, but they go in the right direction for the viewers, which is really interesting. So there's tiny little snails on the screen right now. But yeah, I had a fantastic time. So like I said, we had professionals on day one last week or 2 weeks ago. And then day two was the families, which was a much smaller group. I think it was about 60 people there. And that was just lovely because it was just a space where some of those young people were just so used to being called out and uncomfortable about their STEM behaviours. And then there's us celebrating them and being like, oh, you've never met me before, so you're doing that lovely little toe tapping thing. Yes, let's do that. That's lovely. And I was doing that, 14-year-old doing the little toe tapping thing, showing them some of my stims that I really enjoy. And I was like, oh, you've got a tangle, so I think you're probably similar to me and you're more tactile, and have a look at this one. And so I was showing them that I like to take one of the weights out because then it's weight
it's slightly uneven, so you get to see that. Yeah,
because I can feel it more.
Oh yes.
If it's got, so Annette likes this for the visual, so it has to be smooth. That's pointless to me because I need the tactile feedback. So I gave that to this 14-year-old. Oh, I was her friend for the rest of the day because she would then, coming up and just sharing over stims is so, so lovely. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. But yes, sharing our stims It's just very, very enjoyable as well. So we're going to do autistic joy soon. Okay, so yes, what's the final question? Are you going to bamboozle me? Is it going to be, oh, it is the typical one. Okay. Mayonnaise or salad cream? There is no miracle whip.
Okay. I'm recently getting into peronaise, like peri-peri mayonnaise.
Okay.
That's pretty good.
Okay, Si might take that because it's technically mayonnaise.
Mm-hmm.
So Si is team mayonnaise, statistically mayo.
Nice.
So Si loves mayo, I'm salad cream, and so we just like to see what side our guest falls on, which is always great. Thank you ever so much, Chris, and thank you everybody in the comment section. There were loads of comments, but we had so much to cover, I'm afraid I couldn't keep up and grab them. So feel free, if you get any time, to have a look through the comments, because lots of people just chatting and talking about the survey. And for people here, next week we've got at least one guest, there might be two, on situational mutism, and it will be down to the day about whether they are communicating via chat or via mouth words. So that will be really good. So we're going to do situational mutism next week. So thank you, everybody. Chris, feel free to stay on for a second while we have the outro music, and we'll see everyone else next week.
Right, thank you, everyone.
And now she has to find, where's the outro?